Have you ever walked into a room and felt like the wallpaper had more right to be there than you Naomi did at the Rothschild Gala? No red carpet, no diamonds, just a handmade navy dress and a torn seam that silenced the room. They laughed, quietly, cruelly. But what no one knew was Naomi wasn't crashing the party, she was the invitation. She didn't just stitch fabric, she stitched herself back into a legacy that once erased her. As someone who's spent over a decade uncovering Black woman stories buried under silence, I can tell you this one rewrites everything. In the next 60 seconds, you'll see how Naomi turned a moment of humiliation into a movement, uncovered the truth behind a stolen board seat, and made power answer to history. Naomi Chambers, 38, seamstress, single mother. She didn't raise her voice. She raised the stakes. If you skip this story, you'll keep believing legacy is inherited. But Black woman stories aren't passed down. They're reclaimed. And this one starts with a rip and ends with a reckoning. She wasn't supposed to be there. That's what someone whispered when Naomi stepped onto the marble floor of the Rothschild Gala, the kind of whisper that carries louder than a scream. She had come straight from work, no red carpet, no diamond clutch, just a stitched navy dress she made herself in the quiet hours after tucking her daughter to bed. The invitation was real. Her presence apparently wasn't. One woman in a gold gown sneered, "Did someone lose their stylist?" Another murmured, "Is she catering?" No one asked Naomi her name. That night wasn't supposed to belong to her. It belonged to Victoria Hensley, the heiress, the darling, the board's newest director. It was her moment. And Naomi, she was the forgotten favor, a plus one of someone who didn't show up, someone who never told her this was a ballroom of bloodlines. The room went still when Naomi bent down to adjust her hem, and the back seam ripped, audible, sharp, like paper tearing across the bones of silence. Laughter. Not loud. Worse. Contained. Controlled. The kind of cruelty that knows it's in power and doesn't need to raise its voice. Naomi didn't cry. She didn't run. She reached for her purse, trying to disappear without letting the tremble in her hands show. But then he stepped forward, Declan Rothschild, son of the host, suit pressed like sculpture, eyes the color of Atlantic winter. He bent down, picked up the fabric with a kind of reverence and said, "It's hand-sewn. Is this your work?" She nodded, silent. He looked around the room, then at her, and simply said, "You shouldn't leave. Not yet." That's when the cameras clicked. Flashbulbs, a swirl of faces. And for a second, just one, Naomi looked like she belonged to the story. The next morning, hashtags exploded. The seam. Black woman at the ball. Who is she? In a world that often erases women like her, Naomi's silence stitched something louder than words. This is where our story begins, not with a fairy tale entrance, but with a torn seam, a room full of eyes, and a woman who refused to break. Because Black woman stories don't start with perfection. They start with pain and still walk into power. Naomi didn't plan to become a headline. She had no idea her dress, the one she made with scraps of blue silk and midnight patience, would trend by morning. But there it was, on the front page of a blog that usually covered scandals, not seamstresses. The woman who didn't flinch. That's what they called her. What they didn't see was how her hands shook as she sat in her car that night, key in the ignition, too afraid to drive. The streetlight outside the Gala cast long shadows on the dashboard, like her past had followed her there, uninvited, unashamed. She whispered to herself, "You made it through worse." But it didn't feel like triumph. It felt like survival, the kind that leaves no medal, just silence. Naomi had always been good at silence. As a girl, she learned to shrink in rooms that didn't want her to be polite in the face of dismissal, to carry rejection like a purse she never got to put down. People called her quiet. What they meant was convenient. At home, her daughter Nia was asleep, a stuffed bear tucked under her chin, the way Naomi used to sleep with scraps of fabric tucked under her pillow. dreaming of patterns of places that didn't laugh when she said designer. She sat by the edge of the bed, brushed a curl from Nia's face, and felt a sting behind her eyes. Not because of the laughter, not because of the rip, but because for one small moment someone had seen her, and now the world had questions. Who is she? They asked. Who invited her? Is she Declan's new... They never asked if she had a name. The next day, Naomi walked into her shop, a second-hand sewing corner in the back of a forgotten plaza, and found 3 messages stuck under the door. 2 were rude, 1 was kind, but the kind one was signed R. She read it twice. The room didn't deserve your silence, but it needed your grace. No name, no return address. She folded the note, slid it into her wallet, and stared at the reflection in the cracked store mirror. They called her the Seam. They meant it as a nickname a moment, but maybe it was more. A seam holds everything together, even when it tears. Monday came with rain, the kind that made sidewalks shine like glass and forced the city to slow down. Naomi didn't mind. Rain had a way of equalizing things: suits and sneakers, luxury and leftovers, all soaked the same. She was adjusting the display on the shop window when the bell above the door chimed. A woman walked in. Pale beige trench coat, designer heels, eyebrows like blades. The kind of woman who didn't come to places like Naomi's. "Are you her?" the woman asked, no greeting. Naomi looked up, clothespins still in hand. "Excuse me." The woman from the Rothschild Gala, with the seam incident. Naomi didn't flinch. "I'm Naomi." The woman raised one perfect brow. "I'm Victoria Hensley." The name landed heavy. Naomi had heard of her, of course. Declan's longtime associate, heir to a chain of publishing houses and self-declared philanthropic face of the family. She was the one with the speech at the gala, the one who never looked Naomi's way. "I just wanted to say," Victoria began, inspecting a rack of hand-stitched skirts with the air of someone judging produce. "It was brave what you did, standing there, not making a scene." Naomi said nothing. Victoria's voice dropped half a tone, gentle, performative. "But perhaps next time, check the dress code." There it was, the second slap wrapped in civility. Naomi met her gaze. "I made the dress. For myself." Victoria tilted her head. "Even more admirable. I'm sure it meant something to someone." She turned to leave, her heels clicking a punctuation mark on the exchange. But just before the door, she paused. "By the way," she added, "Declan's very spontaneous. Don't read too much into it." Naomi smiled, but it was the kind of smile forged in fire. After the door shut, she exhaled through her nose, slow, controlled. Then walked to the back of the shop, pulled out a half-finished jacket from a mannequin, and stared at it like it owed her an answer. The seam on the right sleeve wasn't laying flat. She unpicked the stitches thread by thread, because sometimes to fix what's broken, you have to take it apart. No drama, no tears, just hands that knew what to do when the fabric refused to listen. Outside, the rain kept falling, and inside, Naomi stitched. Not just cloth, but dignity. Because in Black women's stories, we don't scream for rooms to notice. We rebuild the rooms and choose who gets to enter. Naomi knew that Victoria hadn't come to compliment her. Women like that didn't descend from marble towers to praise seamstresses. They came to remind you of the line and where they thought you stood. And lines. Naomi had lived her life between them. At 7, she learned to trace her name between ruled paper lines, careful not to smudge. Her teacher never called on her, but praised the neatness of her desk. At 13, she was told to smile more. When boys got loud, to be thankful when they stared too long. At 22, pregnant and alone, she stood in front of a receptionist who looked her over and said, "We don't take walk-ins without insurance." It was always polite, always professional, and always clear. "You are not one of us." That's what made Victoria's visit sting. Not the words, not even the condescension. It was the familiarity. That smile, that tone, that performance of grace meant to keep you small. Naomi had seen it on landlords who raised the rent because the neighborhood was changing. On HR managers who said, "We loved your interview, but we're moving in a different direction." on parents who pulled their kids from the sewing program once they saw the instructor was black. She had been edited out of rooms like this her whole life until last weekend when the edit failed. And now people were noticing. But not her story, just her silence. Did you hear what she said, Marlene? Her neighbor from 2 shops down popped in that afternoon with a hot chai and wide eyes. Victoria Hensley was on the morning show. Said she admires the quiet strength of women who know their place. Naomi didn't blink. Their place. Marlene snorted. Yeah, like we're furniture. Naomi sipped the chai. Vanilla. Extra cinnamon. Her favorite. She's worried, Marlene added, eyes glinting. You've made the wrong kind of headlines for her brand. Naomi folded the hem of a new jacket. I didn't make anything. Marlene leaned over. Not yet. When Marlene left, Naomi looked at the sketchbook beneath the counter, the one she hadn't opened in a year. She ran a hand across the cover. Leather, faded, edges curled from time and oil. She opened to a page dated October 2005. A note beside the drawing. One day they won't ask if I belong. They'll ask how I built it. She closed the book, not with triumph, not with fire, but with the quiet steadiness of someone who had never stopped knowing who she was, only waited for the world to remember. The week passed slowly each day, stretching like fabric pulled too tight. Customers came in, some curious, some kind. A few asked questions they pretended were innocent. Are you really the woman from the Rothschild thing? Did you know Declan before that night? Are you going to, ride the wave? Naomi smiled the way she always had, just enough to end the conversation without inviting more. She stayed late every night sewing until the hum of the machine blurred into breath. It wasn't about orders. It was about remembering who she was before the headlines, before the hashtags, before the room tried to erase her. On Friday evening, she closed early. The shop felt too full of noise she couldn't see. She walked the long way home through neighborhoods where no one knew her name, where corner boys nodded and aunties braided hair on front steps. The sky was molasses, the moon barely visible behind city haze. She passed a mural, a black woman with her hands raised, not in surrender, but creation. Threads danced from her fingertips, weaving stars into sky. Naomi stopped. She had passed this wall for years, never noticed it fully. But tonight the paint felt alive. A girl no older than 12 sat nearby, sketching the mural with a mechanical pencil and fierce focus. Naomi knelt beside her. She yours? The girl nodded. In my head. Naomi pointed to the stars on the woman's hands. You gave her the power. The girl shrugged. Everyone else makes us victims. I didn't want her to beg. Naomi blinked. Something about that line lodged deep. I didn't want her to beg. She reached into her tote and pulled out a small leather pouch, needles, chalk, a silver thimble. She handed it to the girl. You're not just drawing, she said. You're stitching. The girl smiled. Naomi stood, nodded once, and walked on. At home, Nia had left a note, made spaghetti. Don't work too late, Mom. She sat by the window bowl and lap and watched the city blink in and out of shadow. And when she finally lay in bed, there was no fear, no shame, no memory of seams tearing or laughter behind champagne. Only one thought, soft as cotton, firm as thread. They could laugh, they could whisper, but they would not undo her. Because black women's stories don't end where the world tries to stop them. They unfold one stitch, one breath, one chapter at a time. It started with the ledger, a thick, leather-bound book left open on Victoria's assistant's desk by accident or arrogance. Naomi hadn't meant to see it. She'd come by the Rothschild Foundation office at Declan's request to drop off fabric samples for a youth project they were discussing. But while she waited in the lobby, she glanced down at the open page. Names, numbers, dates. Most people wouldn't have made sense of it. But Naomi didn't just see columns, she saw patterns, inconsistencies, a string of entries that formed a shape no one else seemed to notice. 12 grants, all redirected. 5 of them cut within days of Victoria's speeches on equity. The numbers formed a rhythm, a lie wrapped in polish. She blinked once, twice, then looked away. By the time Declan came out, she was quiet again, polite again. But something in her posture had changed, like a seam pulled too tight. "You okay?" he asked. Naomi smiled. "Just noticing things." He laughed. "Of course you are. You always do." That evening back at her shop, she pulled out a box from under her work table. Inside, notes from her teenage years. She used to memorize bus schedules for fun, could recall the contents of shelves after a single glance. Teachers thought she cheated. She stopped raising her hand. Now she laid out the mental map she had seen in the ledger, cross-checked it with news articles, public filings, and whispered threads from the sewing circles that doubled as neighborhood intelligence networks. By midnight, the whole story sat in her notebook, quiet, damning, undeniable. She closed the book, sat back, and whispered to herself, "I wasn't supposed to see that." The next day, during a community panel at the foundation, Naomi asked a question. Simple, calm, surgical. "Can the board clarify why 5 youth sewing programs were defunded this quarter despite being fully enrolled?" The room stilled. Victoria blinked. Declan glanced her way. No one answered. Naomi didn't press. She just smiled and thanked them for their time. Later, 3 different staffers approached her in private. "How did you know?" one asked. "That info hasn't been released." Naomi just nodded. "I read things." But it wasn't reading. It was remembering, calculating, seeing what others missed because she was never supposed to be looking. And as she walked out into the dusk alone, but not unnoticed, a question rose in her chest like smoke. "I know I'm not the only one who's ever felt like this. Like they were supposed to stay quiet even when the truth was loud." By Thursday, the whispers had started. "She's not just a seamstress," someone said behind her at a foundation brunch. "I heard she used to work in finance," another added wide-eyed. Naomi said nothing. She sat at a table near the back, nibbling at a croissant, sipping weak coffee, watching the room like it was a play she'd seen a dozen times. Same players, same scripts. But now somehow, she wasn't invisible anymore. People were looking at her not with pity, not with mockery, but with something closer to wariness, as if she knew things she shouldn't, as if she had access to a script they didn't. Victoria kept her distance, but Naomi noticed the extra assistant, now trailing her clipboard, always in hand, eyes always scanning. And during Victoria's closing remarks about transparency and leadership, Naomi watched her hands. Smooth, controlled, but her left thumb tapped against her palm, a nervous tick. The mask was cracking. That night, Naomi stayed late at her shop again. She wasn't sewing, she was reading. Not books, people. Emails, grant proposals, press releases. They all said something, but what they left out said more. She laid the papers out like puzzle pieces across the cutting table, tracing connections between names and funds and silence. It wasn't just 5 programs that had been cut. It was every initiative where she'd seen kids from neighborhoods like hers, Southside teens with big eyes and louder dreams. "Coincidence?" Marlene asked, leaning in the doorway with her arms crossed. Naomi didn't look up. "Pattern." Marlene nodded slowly. "You always did see things other people didn't." "I was taught to," Naomi replied. "When you're not supposed to belong, you learn how to listen, how to look without being seen." The shop fell quiet. Then Marlene said something that stuck like a pin. "Maybe it's time they saw you." Naomi didn't answer. But the next morning she wore a bold red dress to the foundation's open forum, a color she hadn't worn since her mother's funeral. She stood in the audience, asked a question about budget allocations, cited exact figures. When Victoria tried to deflect, Naomi pulled a photocopy from her bag, publicly available, but edited down to a damning highlight. The crowd shifted. Some applauded. Some gasped. Victoria smiled tightly. "Miss Naomi, is it? You seem very prepared." Naomi tilted her head. "Is that a problem?" Victoria said nothing. And in that pause, Naomi didn't raise her voice. She didn't need to, because sometimes power doesn't speak louder. It just stops apologizing. It happened during the donor mixer, a room full of wealth pretending to care, Crystals clinked, laughter floated, and deals were made in half hugs and wine refills. Naomi didn't want to be there, but Declan had insisted. "They need to see you," he'd said. "The real you." She didn't know what real he meant, so she wore navy again. No seams torn this time, hair pulled back tight, no lipstick, just presence. Halfway through the evening, a man in a tailored gray suit asked her what school she'd gone to. She replied, "Public, District 12. He smiled like he hadn't heard her. "But where did you study finance?" "You clearly have a background. Those numbers you cited, impressive." Naomi tilted her head. "I used to count broken zippers and unpaid invoices. Same math, different stakes." The man blinked. Then, to test her, he rattled off a list of budget lines from a recent foundation report. Naomi didn't even pause. Line 14B shows a 16% increase in admin expenses unexplained. The youth program budget dropped 22% during the same window. The report used last year's figures in two charts, sloppy or strategic, I haven't decided. He stared. She smiled. Declan nearby laughed low. "Told you." And then it escalated. One of the foundation's legal advisors, sharp suit, sharper tongue, walked over trying to play mediator. "Miss Naomi," he began, condescending smile in place. "I think there's some confusion about what level of access you have to internal data." Naomi raised an eyebrow. "Confusion? I haven't seen anything you haven't published publicly. I just read better." He tried to challenge her, citing obscure policy. She cut him off kindly, but with surgical clarity. "You're referencing the revised charter from 2019, but you're misquoting Clause 8. That version was amended again in 2021. Page 17, line 3. The silence that followed was thick. Even Victoria turned. People began whispering, not mocking, not dismissing, questioning. Who is she? How does she know this? Why wasn't she on the board? Naomi felt it. The shift. Not respect yet, but fear. The soft, early kind. The kind that makes powerful people squint. She didn't gloat. She didn't smile. She just excused herself, walked to the terrace, and let the cold air fill her lungs. She looked out over the city and whispered, "You can't teach this. You survive it." And maybe that was her real training, surviving rooms that wanted her quiet and remembering everything they tried to hide. By Monday, Naomi's name was on a list. Not the guest list, not a donor roll. A list whispered behind closed boardroom doors, people to watch. Declan didn't confirm it outright, but the way he looked at her during lunch, the way he hesitated before speaking, it told her enough. "She's not dangerous," he said to Victoria in passing. "She's inconvenient," Victoria replied, voice smooth as satin. "And sometimes that's worse." They'd started tracking her schedule. Naomi caught the new foundation intern taking photos of her workshop from across the street, pretending to be on a call. When she approached, he stammered something about urban outreach visuals. She didn't press. Let them look. She had nothing to hide. But when she got home that night, her daughter Nia held up a letter, one Naomi never saw arrive. Unmarked envelope. Inside a formal invitation. "You are cordially invited to attend a private women's leadership roundtable." The sender, Victoria Hensley. The irony was almost laughable. Naomi didn't RSVP. She just showed up. The event was intimate, selective. All polished wood, soft lighting, and curated diversity. Women from finance, tech, arts, and politics. And in the center, Victoria poised like a queen who built her throne with curated chaos. Naomi entered, quietly sat at the edge of the circle. Victoria saw her, smiled, spoke her name sweetly like it tasted expensive. "Naomi, dear, so glad you could join us." There was tension in the room, unspoken but palpable. Some women glanced between them. Some looked away. Victoria began with a monologue about legacy, about the burden and beauty of power, about how, as women, we must protect the institutions we inherit. Then she turned to Naomi. "Would you like to share your perspective?" Naomi paused, then said, "Calm as still water, legacy without justice is just well-dressed theft." The room fell into a hush so quiet Even the AC seemed to hold its breath. Victoria smiled wider, but her eyes narrowed just enough for Naomi to see it. This wasn't a conversation, it was a test, a warning. Naomi leaned forward, voice low but firm. I didn't come here to disrupt, but I won't stay silent to be included, and I won't protect structures that never protected us. Victoria's smile didn't falter, but one of the women near her shifted in her chair just slightly, just enough. Naomi saw it. The ripple had started. Even here in this carefully staged theater of feminine power, the script was no longer safe. And Naomi, she wasn't reading their lines anymore. She was writing her own. The next morning, Naomi found a bouquet on her doorstep. White peonies. No note. Just the kind of arrangement that meant money or secrets or both. She didn't bring them inside, left them by the bins. Something about the gesture felt like surveillance wrapped in satin. At the shop, she found an envelope slipped under the door, handwritten, no return address. Inside was a single sheet of paper. You are being watched, not feared yet, but that depends on what you do next. No signature. Naomi stared at it for a long time, not afraid, not yet, but the kind of alertness that comes from years of being told to keep her head down, and now realizing someone had been watching the whole time. She folded the note, slid it between the pages of her sketchbook, then opened her laptop. What she found next made her breath stop. A grand audit released quietly at 2 a.m. No press release, no announcement. And buried in the 8th paragraph, upon preliminary review, we found that several youth funds had been consolidated under dormant shell accounts awaiting board ratification. She recognized the account numbers, the same ones she saw in the ledger weeks ago. Someone had acted on her question, quietly, efficiently, but not for justice, for damage control. Victoria was trying to erase the evidence before it spread, rewrite the narrative. Naomi knew that tactic, knew it in her bones. Rewrite, reframe, retell, before the truth gets a voice. She shut the laptop, heart steady now. No fear, only resolve. She was part of the story whether she liked it or not. And stories, real stories, don't pause just because the people in power get uncomfortable. Later that day, while checking inventory, Naomi found Nia sitting on the floor with a stack of old photos. One of them was a woman Naomi hadn't shown her in years. Is this Grandma? Nia asked. Naomi nodded slowly. She looks like you, but stronger. Naomi almost laughed. She was. Nia looked closer. What's this she's wearing? Looks royal. Naomi looked at the photo again. Really looked. A brooch. Gold. Emerald center. Crescent shape. She hadn't thought about that in years. And suddenly it clicked. A memory. A name. An inheritance no one had ever spoken of, not in full. Not to her. And Naomi realized she hadn't been erased. She'd been hidden. Not poor. Protected. Not nobody. Forgotten by design. And now the forgetting was unraveling. Naomi couldn't stop staring at the brooch. The photograph had always been one of her favorites. Her mother standing in front of the old brownstone, chin tilted upward, arms crossed like she owned the sun. Naomi had looked at it 100 times, maybe more, but she'd never noticed the brooch. Not until now. Gold, crescent-shaped, an emerald stone in the center, small but striking, and familiar. She'd seen that shape before twice. Once on a foundation donor's lapel years ago, before anyone knew Naomi's name. And once again more recently in a portrait hanging in the Rothschild offices worn by a woman labeled Founding Benefactor. Naomi sat at her kitchen table, the photo clutched in her hands, heart thudding with a rhythm that felt older than fear. This wasn't coincidence. Her mother had worn that brooch. That meant something. She pulled out the shoebox where her mother's old things were kept. Papers, handwritten notes, scraps of fabric. Near the bottom, folded carefully inside a velvet pouch, was a small envelope. Yellowed, taped shut. Her hands shook slightly as she opened it. Inside was a deed, an old one. Property title 27 Waverly Court. Owner Eunice Chambers. Beneficiary Naomi E. Chambers. She whispered the name like it was someone else's. Her mother's full name. Hers beneath it, in print. Legal, real. Naomi remembered Waverly Court. She'd been there once as a child, an enormous abandoned house they were never allowed to enter. Her mother said it was just storage. But Naomi remembered the iron gates, the stained glass windows, the way her mother stood in front of it, like a soldier on sacred ground. She had forgotten that memory, or maybe someone helped her forget. She pulled out her laptop and searched the address. The result hit like a wave. Waverly Court. Current legal dispute pending. Foundation ownership contested. Naomi stared. She read deeper. The foundation claimed historical rights, citing unverified donor transfers from a private estate. The documents were vague, the signatures missing. But now Naomi had a deed, a real one, with names, with dates. Her mother's brooch wasn't decoration, it was a symbol. And Naomi, she wasn't a guest in their legacy. She was the one they'd written out of it. She leaned back in her chair, hand still clutching the paper. Everything she'd been excluded from, every grant, every meeting, every room, suddenly made sense. Not because she didn't belong, but because if she ever found out who she really was, they wouldn't be able to control her. And now, she knew. The next morning, Naomi stood in front of 27 Waverly Court. It hadn't changed. Still wrapped in rusting gates, still covered in ivy, thick as secrets. The stained glass above the door was cracked, but the color still bled through like memory. She ran her hand along the gate. It didn't creak. It recognized her. The neighborhood was quiet. No signs, no plaques. You wouldn't know this house had once belonged to one of the wealthiest black families in the city unless you remembered. Naomi knocked on the door of the house next to it. The woman who answered was old. Sharp eyes, oxygen tank. The kind of woman who kept stories inside her wrinkles. Ms. Deborah, Naomi asked. The woman looked her up and down. You're Eunice's girl. It wasn't a question. Naomi nodded. Ms. Deborah stepped aside. Come in. They sat in silence for a while. Naomi didn't press. She knew when to let silence do the asking. Deborah finally spoke. They thought no one would remember. They buried her name under donations and ceremonies. But your mama, she was the reason that house stood. She built programs, fed families, stitched futures into kids who didn't think they'd see 20. Naomi looked down at her hands. She left it all to you, Deborah continued. Told me once, if anything happens to me, Naomi gets everything. The house, the legacy, even the board seat they promised me. Naomi froze. Board seat. Deborah nodded. She was one of the original signatories. Before the foundation became what it is now, they needed her name, her standing in the community to launch it. Then why? They never filed it. Deborah interrupted. Said the paperwork was lost. Said she misunderstood. Then a month later they changed the rules, tightened the circle, and when she pushed back suddenly, she was difficult. Disruptive. Sound familiar. Naomi's throat tightened. They pushed her out, Deborah said flatly. And when she got sick, no one came. Not a single damn person from the board she helped build. Naomi took a deep breath. Do you have anything? Proof. Deborah reached for a worn leather binder. Inside, photocopies of letters, meeting notes, and the original proposal signed by her mother and 2 other founders. Naomi's name wasn't on any of them, but her mother's writing was unmistakable, and at the bottom of one document, a scribbled postscript. For Naomi, when the world tries to forget, you remember you were written in ink. Naomi closed the folder slowly. This wasn't just history, it was hers. And they were about to find out what happens when a woman they buried comes back knowing who she is. 3 days later, the package arrived. No return address, just her name printed in bold across a manila envelope. No title, no fluff. Just Naomi E. Chambers. Inside, a letter from a law firm she'd never heard of. Langston and Royce Estate Division. Clean font, cold tone. Per the enclosed documentation, you are the sole legal heir to the Chambers estate, including 27 Waverly Court and its affiliated intellectual and organizational assets. Naomi read it 3 times. Affiliated organizational assets. She turned the page, attached a notarized copy of her mother's will filed archived and activated upon Naomi's 35th birthday. She looked at the date. She had turned 35 4 weeks ago. Another document, the original board agreement between her mother and the Rothschild Foundation's first governing body. Her mother's name stood clearly beside two men she recognized from black and white photos in the foundation hallway. But in this version, there was a fourth line: blank, reserved. Beside it, a handwritten note: seat to be passed to Naomi E. Chambers upon legal majority or succession. No one had ever mentioned it. No one was supposed to. And yet, here it was, filed, witnessed, binding. She opened her laptop, pulled up the Foundation's current bylaws, searched for the word succession. Found it. Article 4C. In cases of legacy board membership, successors may assume unfulfilled seats pending documentation and legal standing. She met both. They couldn't argue technicalities. They couldn't claim ignorance. The law was on her side. For the first time in days, Naomi let out a slow, full breath. She wasn't coming for revenge. She was coming for recognition. And not just for her, but for every black woman written out of rooms she built. Every girl told she was lucky just to be included. Every mother who died believing her work had been stolen. Naomi picked up her phone, dialed the number on the letterhead. Langston and Royce, a woman, answered. Yes, Naomi said, voice steady. I'd like to exercise my succession rights to the Chambers board seat at the Rothschild Foundation. I have the documents. A pause. Then we'll arrange a formal submission immediately. Ms. Chambers, we've been waiting for you. Naomi smiled, not with satisfaction, but clarity. They had tried to bury her legacy under philanthropy and power suits. But they forgot one thing. Truth outlives silence. And now, she wasn't knocking on the door. She held the key. The boardroom was colder than Naomi remembered. Not in temperature, just in energy. Slick walls. A long mahogany table that looked like it had never hosted real hunger or loss. 12 chairs, 11 of them filled. The 12th at the end was empty. Until now. Naomi stepped in. No escort, no announcement, just presence. Victoria looked up first. Her eyes didn't widen, but her lips tightened like someone who knew the storm had arrived, but was still pretending it was just wind. Miss Chambers, said the chairman, an older man whose suit screamed legacy. This is a closed meeting. Naomi set the envelope on the table. Not anymore. Inside, the notarized will, the succession clause, the deed, the founding agreement. She didn't speak. Let the paper do the work. The room fell silent. Victoria glanced down, reading. Her finger paused halfway down the document. Then she looked up, voice sweet with steel. These documents are surprising. Naomi met her gaze. Only if you weren't supposed to see them. The chairman cleared his throat. We'll need legal to verify. They already have, Naomi interrupted. Langston and Royce filed the claim with your general counsel yesterday. You'll find the acknowledgement in your inbox. A woman near the window checked her phone. Froze. She's right, the woman muttered. Victoria stood. Even if this is legally binding, Naomi, you must understand this board functions on cohesion, legacy, trust. Naomi took the 12th chair. My mother gave you all that, and you buried her for it. The words weren't angry, just final. Victoria sat back down slowly. You think taking this seat will change the system? Naomi rested her palms on the table. I'm not here to change your system. She leaned forward. I'm here to end it. One man scoffed. You don't even have a strategy. Naomi smiled. I have something better. Memory. She pulled out a USB drive, set it on the table. Every grant reallocation, every defunded youth program, every speech that promised equity while consolidating control. Victoria reached for it. Naomi slid it out of her reach. You don't get to control the truth anymore. The boardroom went still. Not with fear, not yet, but with recognition that the girl they'd erased wasn't just back, she was documented, determined, and sitting in the seat they'd tried to dissolve into history. And she wasn't asking for space. She was reclaiming it. Naomi didn't plan the press leak, but some truths don't stay hidden once the light finds them. 2 days after the board meeting, the story broke. Descendant of Rothschild Foundation, co-founder reclaims board seat. Who is Naomi Chambers, hidden heir, or strategic threat? The headlines varied, but the photo didn't. Naomi standing in front of Waverly Court, holding the original founding documents in one hand and her mother's photo in the other. No makeup, no smile, no branding. Just proof. And with it came the calls. Reporters, former staff, community leaders who remembered Eunice Chambers not just as a philanthropist, but as a force. One of them, a retired judge, sent a message through Declan. I always wondered what happened to that seat. They finally picked the wrong woman to silence. Victoria stayed quiet at first, but silence doesn't protect power. By Friday, she appeared on the morning talk circuit. Polished, performed, pretending the foundation welcomed all legacies and that Naomi's fresh perspective was exactly what the organization needed. It was a good lie, the kind dressed in pearls and positive language. But Naomi wasn't interested in spin. She attended her first official board meeting that week, not as a guest, not as a disruptor, but as a rightful member. And when the meeting ended, Naomi didn't leave. She stood and said one thing: I want the cameras on next time. The room stiffened. That's not procedure, someone said. Neither was erasing my mother. She looked at Victoria, whose mask cracked just enough to show the heat underneath. We're not hiding anymore, Naomi said. If the foundation serves the people deserve to see what we do. It wasn't a request. Later that evening, Naomi walked into her shop. Nia was waiting, headphones on, watching the news recap. When she looked up, her eyes were wide. They're saying you're like a founder. Naomi smiled. I'm my mother's daughter. That's enough. Nia walked over and held out the old brooch. You should wear it, she said. Naomi took it, clipped it onto her collar. The metal was cool, but the meaning was warm, heavy, unshakable. Outside, cameras flashed. Inside, Naomi stood tall. And when a reporter asked, how does it feel to finally be seen? Naomi replied, I was never invisible. They just stopped looking. She paused, then added, calm as thunder. But I kept watching, and now I see everything. They gave her a podium, but Naomi chose a circle. It was supposed to be a closed-door meeting, foundation donors, local media, select community leaders. The kind of room that claps politely and forgets quickly. But Naomi had other plans. She asked that the gathering be moved to Jefferson Hall, the old community theater her mother helped renovate 2 decades earlier. The space was smaller, creakier, but more honest, more alive. She arrived early, dressed simply. No designer brands, no security detail, just a black blazer, a silk blouse, and the same crescent brooch pinned over her heart. At 6:03 p.m., she walked onto the stage and set her phone on the podium. Pressed go live, then faced the crowd. No notes, no script. My name is Naomi Chambers, she said, voice low and calm. My mother, Eunice Chambers, was one of the 3 founding members of the Rothschild Foundation. You won't find her name on the plaques. You won't see her portrait on the wall. She paused. That was by design. Phones lifted. People started sharing the stream. Naomi continued. She gave her land, her leadership, her life. In return, they gave her silence. And when I was old enough to ask questions, they gave me distance. They rewrote her history. They wrote me out entirely. She reached into a folder and pulled out the documents one by one. The deed, the original board agreement, her mother's will. The truth was always here, she said, laying the papers flat, buried, filed, ignored. A murmur swept through the room. Naomi looked directly into the camera. I didn't come here to destroy. I came to reveal, to reclaim what was stolen, not for me alone, but for every voice silenced because it didn't fit the narrative. At the edge of the stage, Declan stood watching, jaw-tight, eyes wet. He knew what this cost her. Naomi turned to the crowd again. You don't have to clap, she said. You don't have to believe me yet. Just look. Look at what they tried to hide. A journalist in the second row stood. Why now, she asked. Why not take it to court? Naomi smiled. Because justice isn't just paperwork, it's presence. And I'm done being absent. The live stream number ticked past 12,000 viewers. Outside, more people gathered, watching from phones, from windows, from cars pulled to the curb. And somewhere in a quiet office, Victoria Hensley watched too, not blinking, not breathing, because for the first time the truth wasn't just out. It was undeniable. Victoria showed up 15 minutes late, not fashionably, not confidently, just late. She hadn't planned to appear. Her PR team begged her to stay quiet, let it cool down. But the stream kept spreading. The hashtags kept rising. Groucho's Naomi Chambers, Truth Buried, Black Founders Matter. The city wasn't waiting anymore. So now she stood backstage at Jefferson Hall, spine straight, smile taut, flanked by two assistants who looked more nervous than she did. When she finally walked out, cameras flashed. Naomi didn't move. Victoria stepped to the second mic, lips already parted, in a performance she'd perfected for years. "Good evening," she began, voice warm but over-rehearsed. "I want to thank Ms. Chambers for her passion and for reminding us all of the complexity of legacy." Whispers in the crowd. Naomi said nothing. Let her speak. "I was unaware of Ms. Chambers' lineage until very recently," Victoria continued. "But I welcome her voice, her leadership. The foundation has always stood for inclusion." A voice cut through from the back row. Then why was her mother erased? The question hung like fog. Victoria smiled tightly. There are historical complexities, documents lost, transitions over time. Unfortunately, not everything was archived as cleanly as we'd like. Naomi stepped forward. "We found the documents in a storage box, in my mother's handwriting, not archived, buried." The crowd shifted. Victoria tried again. "What matters now is that we move forward together, healing, rebuilding, not dividing the mission we all support." Another interruption. This time, a former staff member stood. "You said Eunice Chambers was a consultant, not a co-founder." "I was there. I remember." A ripple of gasps. Victoria's hand gripped the mic tighter. Naomi turned to the woman. "Would you be willing to say that on record?" She nodded without hesitation. "I already did. I sent a statement to the Chronicle this morning." Victoria's smile cracked. It wasn't a shout. It wasn't chaos. It was worse for her. It was order on Naomi's terms. Naomi leaned toward her mic again, voice even. "You don't have to fear the truth unless you built your power on the lie." Victoria looked at her, really looked, and for the first time there was no patronizing warmth. Only recognition of loss, of a legacy slipping from her hands like sand. A man in the second row whispered to his neighbor, "She's not the face anymore. Naomi is." And he was right, because in that moment, the room, the city, was no longer listening to power. They were watching justice unfold. The room quieted as a figure stepped forward from the far side aisle. Elderly, cane in one hand, envelope in the other. The crowd parted. Naomi straightened. She recognized the woman instantly. Judge Alma Pierce, retired, the first black woman to serve on the city's Superior Court. Victoria paled. The judge didn't wait for permission. She took the spare mic, voice clear despite her age. "I presided over the incorporation of the Rothschild Foundation in 1996, she said. Eunice Chambers sat before me, papers in hand. So did two other founders. I remember her exact words. She looked directly at Victoria. "This isn't charity. It's a structure, and my daughter will inherit it if they won't let me finish it." A stunned silence. Judge Pierce lifted the envelope. "This is my certified copy of the original filing. It lists Eunice Chambers as a full co-founder and stipulates succession rights to Naomi E. Chambers. It was never voided, never challenged. It was simply ignored." She handed the envelope to the moderator. Gasps, camera shutters. The live stream counter surged. Victoria stepped back, visibly rattled. "That document was never submitted to our archives," Naomi interjected calmly. "It was submitted. You just never wanted it found." Judge Pierce turned to Naomi, eyes soft now. "I wanted to come tonight because I've held on to this for decades, hoping the day would come when the truth had an audience again." Naomi nodded slowly. "It has one now." The moderator spoke into the mic. "We verified the judge's filing. The seal is authentic. The board will have to respond to this formally. A man in the audience shouted, "Respond." She owns it now. Laughter, applause, whistles. Victoria turned away, but it was too late. The story had shifted. This wasn't about Naomi being included. It was about her always having belonged and someone else having stolen the pen to rewrite her part. The crowd surged with questions, now most aimed at the foundation board, others at Victoria directly. Naomi said nothing more. She didn't need to. Her silence was no longer seen as submission. It was sovereignty. As Judge Pierce left the stage, she leaned close and whispered, "Your mother was fire, but you're the match they thought they buried." Naomi didn't blink. She just looked at the cameras, at the people, and let the weight of that truth settle. By morning, the narrative had collapsed, and not for Naomi. The Chronicle's front page headline read, "The Forgotten Founder Naomi Chambers and the Truth Behind the Rothschild Rewrite." Beneath it, a photo of Naomi and Judge Pierce standing shoulder to shoulder, documents in hand. Inside, testimonials from former staff, youth program alumni, even former donors, each with a piece of the puzzle, each confirming Naomi's inheritance wasn't symbolic. It was structural, legal, historical. The foundation's PR office issued a vague statement about internal reviews and celebrating legacy. But the damage was done. No one was buying the spin anymore. Community centers renamed scholarship walls. Old murals were touched up. Eunice Chambers' face repainted, her name restored. The city council proposed a resolution honoring her work. Victoria. She went silent. Her face disappeared from press releases. Her title was still intact, but power isn't a title, it's who people believe. And they didn't believe her anymore. Meanwhile, Naomi walked through her old neighborhood and was greeted like a returning soldier. An elderly man waved from his porch. "You gave 'em hell, girl." Kids from the youth center ran up to hug her, one of them shouting, "You're the real president now." But Naomi just smiled, because it wasn't about applause. It was about air, breathing room that had been denied for too long. Breathing room for women like her mother, for every organizer, educator, and activist who'd been erased behind polite power. That afternoon, Naomi received an invitation to speak at a citywide justice summit. Headliner, first name on the flyer. She turned it down. Instead, she asked that the spot be given to a young activist who'd once been expelled from a foundation program for questioning the curriculum. The summit agreed. That same night, Naomi hosted her own town hall, live-streamed, open to all. Not polished, not perfect, just people. The mic was passed around. Community leaders shared stories. A former foundation staffer choked up telling Naomi, "We watched it happen. We didn't know how to stop it, but we see you now." Naomi nodded. Seeing is how it starts. Staying is how it grows. And they stayed. Hours passed. Candles lit. Someone sang. Someone prayed. The hashtag Justice for Eunice trended all week. But Naomi didn't trend. She endured. She rose. And as the noise settled, the community didn't chant her name. They repeated something softer, something truer. She made space. The next board meeting was public. By Naomi's request, cameras rolled quietly in the back, live streamed to over 50,000 viewers. No velvet rope, no press pass required. Just a link, a login, and the truth. Victoria arrived first. She sat at the far end of the table, not defiant, just present. Her smile was gone, replaced by posture, professional, precise, but faded. Naomi walked in last. She wore white, not for innocence, for memory, for her mother. The room stood instinctively, not out of fear, out of recognition. Naomi didn't ask for silence. She brought it with her. She sat down, opened her folder, and without raising her voice spoke. "Today is not a trial. It's a reckoning. One that should have happened years ago, when my mother's name was first erased, when her seat was left empty, when you built institutions on the backs of invisible labor and called it leadership." No one interrupted. She continued, "I don't need apologies. I don't want a statue. I want structure, transparency, redistribution. I want the truth to become policy, not just performance." She placed a motion on the table. A new bylaw proposal. All founding members must be acknowledged in public records retroactively and permanently. Silence. Then one board member nodded. Then another. And another. Motion passed. Naomi didn't flinch. She reached for the second document, a formal vote to rename the foundation's youth wing. The Eunice Chambers Center for Justice and Growth. This time applause broke out before the vote was even called. Even Victoria lowered her eyes. Naomi leaned back in her chair, not satisfied, just steady. She looked into the camera. This isn't about one woman, she said. This is about what happens when you silence a legacy long enough it comes back louder than ever. Not with noise, with receipts. The room held its breath. Naomi tapped the table once, and to every black woman watching who's ever been told she's too much, or too angry, or not a good fit, let them tell you that. Let them print it. She paused. But also, let them read your name in ink. She stood. Nia was watching from the doorway. Naomi gave her a soft nod. This wasn't vengeance. This was inheritance. Reclaimed. And as she walked out of the boardroom, into the crowd, into the street, Naomi didn't wave. She didn't speak. She just smiled. Because this time, they knew exactly who she was. The letter arrived on cream linen paper. No email, no press release. Just an envelope slid under the door of Naomi's shop one quiet morning. Her name written in blue ink, no title, no flourish. Just Naomi E. Chambers. She opened it slowly, hands steady. Inside the city council's seal, a formal invitation. In recognition of your rightful place in this city's legacy, we are honored to invite you to speak as our distinguished guest of honor at the upcoming Civic Remembrance Gala. A commemorative plaque bearing the name of your mother, Eunice Chambers, will be unveiled at the Hall of Civic Builders. We would be honored if you would join us in this moment. Naomi exhaled softly. She reread the letter 3 times, not for disbelief, but for the feeling behind it. It wasn't performative. It didn't sound like guilt wrapped in gold leaf. It felt honest. The gala was a citywide event held once a decade to honor those who had shaped the community across generations. Naomi had watched the last one from a borrowed TV in the shop's back room years ago, never imagining her name would one day be listed on the program. This time she wasn't watching. She was being invited. She called Nia first. "You're on the front page again," Nia teased. Naomi laughed. "For once I'm not the one holding the microphone. You're gonna speak though, right?" A pause. "I think I have to," Naomi said. "Not for them. For her." Preparations moved quickly. The Hall of Civic Builders cleared a full panel wall. A local sculptor commissioned a bronze plaque with Eunice's face, soft-eyed chin, high just like the photo Naomi kept by her bed. As the night approached, messages poured in. Community leaders, teachers, girls from the scholarship program who now ran their own businesses. Each note ended the same. "Thank you for staying visible." On the night of the gala, Naomi stood backstage in a black floor-length gown, hair pulled back, the crescent brooch gleaming at her collar. She wasn't nervous. She wasn't performing. She was arriving. The curtain parted. Spotlight found her. The applause was quiet at first, then built row by row until the room stood. Not for spectacle, for remembrance and recognition. The room hushed as the host stepped back from the podium. "Before we invite Ms. Naomi Chambers to speak," he said gently, "one of our founding board members has asked to say a few words." A flicker passed across Naomi's face. She hadn't expected this. From the side aisle, a woman rose. Not Victoria. It was Geraldine Marks, former treasurer of the Rothschild Foundation, the longest-serving board member, and one of the few who had been there the day Naomi's mother signed her name into history. Geraldine walked slowly, heels clicking against marble. She reached the mic, didn't hold notes, only breath and regret. "I stood in the room," she began, voice trembling, "when Eunice Chambers signed her name to a mission we claimed to believe in. I watched her pour her brilliance, her time, and her property into building something she hoped would outlive us all." She looked at Naomi, and when the time came to preserve her place, I didn't fight hard enough. I didn't raise my voice. I convinced myself that silence was diplomacy, that deference was strategy, that someone else would speak. She paused, swallowing. But silence is a language, and I spoke it fluently. The audience leaned in. I watched your mother disappear from meeting notes, from agendas, from memory, and then I watched it happen to you. Naomi's eyes did not well with tears, but they softened. I don't expect forgiveness, Geraldine continued, and I know legacy can't be repaired by a podium, but this tonight is my attempt to stop writing footnotes when full chapters were stolen. She reached into her coat pocket and pulled out a small velvet box. This was given to me by your mother. She asked me to hold it for when Naomi is ready to carry the flame. She opened it. Inside a slim gold pendant etched with the words, "Write it yourself." The same handwriting as on Naomi's childhood notes. The same ink. Gasps moved through the crowd. Geraldine stepped forward, holding out the box. I think you've earned it. Naomi didn't rush. She walked to the mic, took the box, closed it gently, then nodded. It was not a moment for revenge. It was not about being right. It was about someone who should have spoken sooner, finally choosing not to be silent. And for Naomi, that was enough. Not because it fixed the past, but because it marked a beginning, a shift. The first time someone from the inside stepped out and stood beside her. For real. Naomi stepped to the podium. The room, hundreds of eyes, hearts, histories, waited. But she didn't speak right away. She took out the pendant Geraldine had returned, held it up to the light, then slipped it around her neck. Only then did she begin. I've thought a lot about the word recognition. Her voice was soft, steady. It comes from the Latin recognoscere, to know again, to remember. She looked across the crowd. My mother wasn't forgotten. She was buried, intentionally, strategically, systemically. No flinch, no fury. Just fact. And for years I chased justice like it was a finish line. Like if I could prove myself enough, show enough, fight enough, someone would finally hand me a stamp that said valid, accepted, real. A hush settled. But justice isn't something you wait for. And it's not something someone else grants you like a favor. Justice is truth with legs. She smiled small and firm. And truth walks eventually. Several in the audience teared up. Naomi continued, This city didn't erase me because I was invisible. It erased me because I was undeniable. Because I came from a woman who didn't ask for permission to lead. She gestured toward the newly unveiled bronze plaque behind her, her mother's face cast in warm light. She didn't do this for applause. She did it because we deserved better. Naomi let that sit. Let the weight pass row by row. I'm not standing here as a symbol. I'm standing here because I refuse to sit down. And if that makes me hard to handle, too loud, too stubborn, so be it. Laughter, soft and affirming, rippled through the crowd. I want to thank the people who stood up, who spoke late but still spoke, who broke silence with honesty. She glanced at Geraldine, then back to the audience, and to every girl watching this, especially the black ones who's ever been made to feel small in the very room her mother built. Please hear me. Naomi leaned into the mic. You don't need to be invited into power you inherited. Applause broke, long rising. She stepped back from the mic and placed one hand gently on her mother's bronze shoulder. This is for her, Naomi said quietly. But it's also for the ones still writing. She looked at the crowd, then up, past the chandelier, past the ceiling, as if Eunice was listening. Maybe she was. The ribbon was gold, not red, not blue. Gold because Eunice Chambers believed black girls deserved to shine in every color the world tried to deny them. Naomi stood at the gate of the new facility, the Eunice Chambers Center for Justice and Growth. It used to be a rundown municipal building. Now it gleamed with new paint glass doors and murals painted by local students, each panel telling a chapter of resistance, of joy, of rebuilding. Beside her stood Nia Judge Pierce and two scholarship students who'd written essays about Eunice's legacy stories Naomi had read through tears. The crowd stretched into the street. Former board members, local press, church choirs, elders in folding chairs, and toddlers on shoulders. It wasn't a fancy ribbon cutting. It was a homecoming. Naomi took the scissors, steel, heavy, historic, passed down from the city's first black councilwoman, whose granddaughter now stood in the crowd holding a camcorder. Before cutting, Naomi turned to the mic one last time. "This center isn't just named after my mother," she said. "It's built from her values." She pointed at the wall above the front doors, where the center's motto was painted in bold freehand script. "We don't rise alone." This place, Naomi continued, will offer legal aid, mentorship, civic education, and a space to breathe for every girl who's ever been told she's too much, and every boy who's been punished for being soft. The crowd murmured approval. But more than that, Naomi said this building is proof that you can't silence a woman who plants seeds while you sleep. She turned to Nia, who handed her a small silver box. Inside, sunflower seeds. Naomi walked to a patch of fresh earth just beside the entrance. Kneeling, she pressed the seeds into the ground with her bare hands. "She used to say, 'If they cut your might grow roots instead,'" Naomi said softly. Then she stood, brushed off her palms, and turned to face the ribbon. With one clean motion, she cut. Cheers erupted. Someone played drums. The choir began to hum. And Naomi, she didn't raise her arms in victory. She held the ribbon in both hands, walked it to the crowd, and placed it in the lap of a 10-year-old girl in braids who'd never met Eunice but would now grow up in a center built from her name. Naomi bent down and whispered, "Tell your story, baby. Don't wait for permission." The girl nodded wide-eyed, and Naomi smiled, because legacy isn't marble or gold. It's what blooms after you leave the door open. That night, the center glowed. The halls were full, not with donors or board members, but with life. Kids chased each other across the new reading room. Teenagers ran their fingers along the etched wall of names. Elders sipped sweet tea in the shade of the new garden Naomi had planted with the sunflower seeds. It wasn't a monument. It was breathing. Naomi sat on the front steps beside Nia, their shoes off bare feet resting on cool brick. "You did it," Nia said softly. Naomi didn't answer right away. She watched a little girl tug on her mom's sleeve and point at the plaque bearing Eunice's name. "Not just me," she said. "You kept me steady when I wanted to disappear." Nia leaned against her shoulder. "That's what you taught me to do. See the woman, not just the noise." They sat there a while quiet, until a group of middle school girls walked up, one holding a sketch pad. Ms. Naomi, the tallest, asked, "Yes, sweetheart." The girl held up her drawing, a pencil sketch of Naomi holding a microphone with vines wrapping around it, blooming into sunflowers. "I made this for you. You look like someone who makes things grow." Naomi blinked, took the drawing gently. "Thank you," she said, her voice catching. "This is the best award I've ever received." The girls giggled and ran off. Nia grinned. "You've got fan art now. Next up, superhero cape." Naomi chuckled. "I'll settle for a quiet night and a working printer." Just then, Declan walked up with a small gift box. "No speeches, I swear," he said. Naomi raised an eyebrow. "You sure the podium misses you?" He laughed and handed her the box. From the board, the new one. Inside, a key. Gold. Simple. Etched with one word. "Ours." Naomi held it in her palm for a long moment. "This wasn't about winning," she said quietly. "It was about returning." Declan nodded. "And now?" Naomi looked out at the center, at the people, at the night that finally felt like peace. "Now," she said, "we make sure no one else gets locked out." Nia squeezed her hand. And in that moment, Naomi didn't feel like someone who'd reclaimed something lost. She felt like someone planting a future for strangers, for sisters, for the next girl with too many questions and not enough room. And as the lights dimmed, the laughter echoed, and the mural of Eunice shimmered under the stars. Naomi didn't need to be seen anymore. She needed to make sure others wouldn't be invisible again. Not on her watch. Not ever again. The classroom smelled like chalk and courage. Naomi stood at the front sleeves, rolled whiteboard, clean 30 eyes locked on her every move. All girls, all black, all between the ages of 9 and 15. They called it The Table, a program Naomi had founded 6 months after the ribbon cutting. Not a school, not a nonprofit, a space, one where no one had to shrink to fit. The room wasn't fancy folding chairs, secondhand laptops, peeling paint. but it had something rare: freedom. First rule of being in this room, Naomi said, marker in hand, is you don't raise your hand to speak. You raise your voice. A few girls giggled. One at the back, bold-braided, said, "What if my voice shakes?" Naomi grinned. "Then shake the whole room, baby." She turned to the board and wrote a single word in all caps: authority. Then circled it. "Who gets to have this?" she asked. Silence. Then white men. Naomi nodded. "That's what the world taught us, right?" Another girl added, "Rich people." Louder. "Rich people." Naomi stepped back. "But here's the thing. Authority isn't something you wait to be given." She tapped the board. "It's something you name, then own." She handed out blank note cards. "Write the one thing you've been told you're not allowed to be. That word they've used to shrink you. And write it like it's your superpower." Girls bent over cards. Words appeared. Loud, bossy, too smart, emotional, angry. Naomi walked the aisles, reading silently, heart full. At the back, the bold-braided girl had written, "Scary." Naomi crouched beside her. "You scare them because you can see through them," she said softly. "That's vision. That's leadership." The girl blinked, then smiled. After class, Naomi sat alone in the courtyard, sipping tea from a chipped mug. The mural of her mother rose behind her, gold leaves climbing the bricks. Declan walked up, hands in his coat. "Your class is trending again," he said, handing her his phone. A clip of Naomi's voice had gone viral. "If your voice shakes, shake the whole room." Thousands of reposts, comments from teachers, students, mothers. A journalist had called it the black girl syllabus we didn't know we needed. Naomi shook her head, amused. "I'm not building a trend." Declan smiled. "No, you're building a table they can't unseat you from." She looked back at the classroom, at the girls still laughing inside, and she whispered to herself, "Let them eat legacy." The folding chairs were set in a wide circle. No stage, no podium. Just people, all ages, all stories. Naomi called it the Mike Share, a monthly community gathering at the Eunice Chambers Center. No agenda, no hierarchy. The only rule: if you speak, speak like you matter. Tonight's circle was packed. Grandmothers, teens, activists, school teachers, even a council member in plain clothes. Naomi sat off to the side, not as host, not as legend, just as listener. The talking stick, a battered mic with sunflowers painted on its base, passed from hand to hand. A woman spoke about losing housing and finding help at the center. A teen read a poem about her name being mispronounced until she claimed it back. A boy talked about wanting to cry in public and being told that was soft. Applause, snaps, soft yeses echoed around. Then it landed in the hands of Zaya, 12 years old, navy hoodie hair in a puff. Naomi knew her well. She rarely spoke. Always sat in the back, eyes sharp, mouth zipped. But tonight Zaya stood, mic in hand, hands shaking. "I wasn't going to talk," she began, "because I didn't think I had anything important to say." Naomi leaned forward. Zaya continued, voice low but steady. "But then I remembered Ms. Naomi said the world don't give you your mic. You gotta pick it up yourself." A few people nodded. Zaya's voice grew. "I used to think being smart made me weird, that talking too much made me a problem, that raising my hand too fast made me stuck up." She swallowed. "But now I think maybe I was just rehearsing to lead." The room froze, not with silence, with stillness, that sacred kind of listening. Zaya looked straight at Naomi. "So I'm saying this out loud, even if my voice shakes. Thank you for making a place where I don't have to be small." The crowd erupted, snaps, claps, even a tear or two. Naomi didn't clap. She stood, walked over, and handed Zaya something from her pocket. The same gold pendant she'd worn to the civic gala. "Write it yourself." Zaya gasped. "But it's yours." Naomi shook her head. "No, it's ours now. Yours to wear, yours to pass someday." Zaya clutched it like a medal, and Naomi turned back to the crowd. "You just met the next generation," she said, "and she's not waiting for permission." That night, Zaya's clip went viral. But more importantly, she came back next week with a notebook and a story of her own. The press release was only 3 sentences long. The Eunice E. Chambers Legacy Fund is now live. It will support young Black women pursuing law education or social impact work. No GPA filters. No essays to prove pain. Just vision, grit, and community. Naomi didn't announce it with a gala or a live stream. She announced it by wiring the first 3 scholarships herself. No fanfare. Just futures. The first recipient was Raina, a 17-year-old who'd been suspended for insubordination after organizing a student protest against book censorship. She opened the acceptance letter on the steps of the same school that punished her. In the envelope, a note from Naomi. Rebellion is just leadership before it gets polished. Keep rebelling. The second was Jasmine, a mother of 2, finishing her associate degree in criminal justice while working night shifts. She cried when she read that childcare was part of the scholarship package. The third was Efioma, a recent immigrant who dreamed of launching a cultural heritage museum in her neighborhood. All 3 were honored quietly during the center's weekly family dinner, a potluck where no one wore badges and everyone brought Tupperware. Naomi stood beside them as they each shared their story. She didn't interrupt, didn't summarize, just nodded, because they didn't need a savior. They needed someone to clear the path and get out of the way. Later that night, Declan sat across from Naomi in her tiny office, lit by a single lamp and the glow of her ancient desktop monitor. "You know this'll outlive you, right?" he said, glancing at the spreadsheet. Naomi smiled. "That's the point?" He looked around at the folders, the photos, the hand-drawn vision boards tacked to cork. "You could take a break, you know. The world finally knows your name." Naomi leaned back. "It was never about my name," she said. "It was about the ones they never learned to pronounce." He nodded, said nothing, then stood and walked out. Naomi stayed behind watching the screen. Under next step, she'd type, "Write legacy guidebook, recruit mentees as fund advisors, create safe legal housing, resource list, trust Black girls." She paused, then added one last bullet. "Let the next one lead," and saved the file, not just to her desktop, but to the future. The city archives hadn't changed much. Same brass handles, same smell of paper and dust and time. Naomi walked in, a lone folder under her arm pendant around her neck. She wasn't here for ceremony. She was here to finish something. The librarian at the front desk, a young Black man named Theo, stood when he saw her. "You really came," he whispered. "I said I would," Naomi replied, smiling. "History waits for no one." He led her past the genealogy wing, past glass cases and rusted file drawers, into the back room labeled Founders and Civic Builders. The last time Naomi had entered this room, her mother's name had been a ghost mentioned in footnotes, if at all. A passing reference, a near myth. Today, Naomi held a different kind of document. She slid the folder across the table to Theo. Inside, notarized records, newspaper clippings, original filings, a signed affidavit from Judge Pierce. And on top, a new biography. Eunice E. Chambers, Architect of Access. "This should have been here a long time ago," Naomi said. Theo opened it carefully, reverently. "It will be now," he promised. He took her to the installation wall, the one lined with brass nameplates. The Rothschild Foundation had 4 founders listed. Now it would have 5. Theo handed Naomi the new plate. Eunice E. Chambers, Education, Equity, Power. Naomi climbed the stepladder herself. No press, no applause. She just drilled the screws in slow and steady, like her mother once built benches for the park. When she stepped back, the room felt fuller. Not complete, but just. Theo whispered, "Would you like to write the first page of the new archive volume?" Naomi nodded. He handed her a fountain pen. She sat at the desk, opened the new book, and wrote. They tried to silence her by excluding her name, but names like seeds only grow stronger in darkness. This archive begins again with her. She signed her name below it, then closed the book. Outside, the city moved on buses, groaned horns echoed life's world. But inside those pages, a new world had begun. And this time, no one would forget who built it. The auditorium was packed, but not formal. Kids sat cross-legged on the stage. Parents leaned against walls. Someone handed out cornbread from a foil tray. No lights, no program. just energy. It was the 1 year anniversary of the table. Naomi stood in the wings watching the girls rehearse their final performance, a spoken word piece written by Zaya and 3 others. The same Zaya who once trembled holding a mic now moved like the stage was hers. Naomi smiled. She didn't need to speak tonight. She'd already said what mattered. Still at the end, the crowd began to chant, "Naomi, Naomi." She stepped up slowly, hands in her jacket, hair tied back. No flash, no mic, just her. "Y'all know I hate speeches," she began. Laughter. "But I'll say this, what we build isn't about me. It's not even about legacy." She paused. "It's about making sure no girl like me has to fight the same ghosts again." She looked at Zaya, who nodded, clutching her gold pendant. Naomi continued, "I'm not leaving a statue behind. I'm leaving a path. Walk it, widen it, rewrite it if you have to, but never let anyone shrink you to fit their story." She turned toward the youngest girl in the front row, maybe 7, holding a hand-drawn sign that said, "Black girls write history too." Naomi knelt and handed her something wrapped in linen. Inside, a journal hand-stitched. The girl blinked. "What do I do with it?" she whispered. Naomi grinned. "Start with your name." The room burst into applause, not loud, but long. And Naomi, she stepped back, hands in her pockets, eyes full but dry. Because this was what victory looked like. Not a crown, not a podium, but a notebook in a child's hands. That night, as the sun dipped behind the city skyline, Naomi walked home alone. Past the mural, past the archive, past all the places she once felt unseen. And she whispered to no one in particular, "Let the next girl be louder than I ever was. If you made it this far, if her story moved you even a little, if you believe that Black women's stories deserve more than erasure, subscribe to Black HerStory Told, because the next name we say might be yours, and we'll be ready to listen."